etc.
That's your seed.
Yes, that's what I see.
Never.
Get a different perspective.
Yeah, Rob, it's funny. It's weird seeing you.
Sometimes you gotta shake things up, you know?
You wouldn't want to get burned.
Yeah, that's right.
You're always there.
I'm here.
All right, good morning, good morning, good morning. Working two screens. Okay, let's start with our Brachot Torah, and we'll jump in. Okay, everybody? Off, feet up. Ragalach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher gishaну mitzvosav v'tzivanu v'asot livrei Torah. All right. Asher kochachem for being here this morning. Yitzchar halicha, Yitzchar limud Torah. We're gonna let's jump in, okay? I wanna. We're going to go over a couple of different things in the parsha this morning. It's as I said last night in my sermon, it's one of the most beautiful parshiot. You know I say that all the time, but it's really, especially in the book of Genesis, it's not. It's it's true. So let's start. We're in chapter 44. If I can get there. Make it a little bigger for those who are online. Okay. Yeah, you with me? I always like to say that those who like cantillation, like musical, the hermeneutics of music, like all of the music that the Torah was placed to, right, are called trope. We call it trope. Cantillation marks. They're little. Diacritical little marks above and below, and so the ones on the first three words are having and all of those marks have names, like fortissimo, like we have Aramaic names for all of them. So and Hebrew. So the marks that are above these three words are kadma ve'azla and then a rivi'i. Like if you look on the top of the Hebrew, I can highlight it. You see where my cursor is on the screen. There's like two parentheses remarks, one above the first word, and then one above the second word. You see, like they look like this, right? Right. So those who know how to read the music, it has the name of it is also like its sound, like the way that it's musical. So it's ba bum ba bum. So that's ba bum ba bum kadma ve'azla, right? So that the music is the word kadma ve'azla. The words mean he got up and he went. That's whenever you have that, it has that. It's almost like a director's
New
mark.
York, New York.
New York, New York. Exactly. Exactly. What a town. And so Kadmavi Aslan means he got up and he went. And of course, that's what he is. Vayigash Elav, it said he got up, he approached him. That's actually what he did. He got up and he approached him. And then Yehuda has the musical remark Rivi'i, which is. What does Rivi'i
Fourth
mean?
child.
The fourth. He's the fourth child. This is the Gaon of Vilna. The Gaon of Vilna said, he got up, and he went the fourth, right? The fourth child, Yehuda. So anyway, Vayashi Lav Yehuda, and Vayomer, and Judah comes close to him. What's the context for this approach? Right? We have come to the most intense moment in the story. Immediately, the preceding verses, basically, the goblet had been found inside of the bag of Benjamin, and right before that had happened, right before the goblet had been found, what did the brothers say to the ones who had chased them and said, hey, hold up, you took the goblet of our ruler. What did they say? No. Of course, in whoever's bag it is found, he shall die. Right? The brothers had put that forth, and then of course they found it in the bag of Benjamin. And what did they do? They tore their clothes, and they said, "No, of course, there's no way. We have to come back." And they said, "No, we will be slaves in place of Benjamin, right?" And so that's where the story had ended, and that's where Joseph, right, where the rabbis beautifully ended. They interrupted the story and left us with a cliffhanger, and it's very dramatic because we're waiting every year. We're waiting to find out what's going to happen. And in this moment, Judah steps forward. Like Vayomer bi Adoni, He says to him, please, my Lord, let my servant appeal to my Lord. Yedaber na avdecha davar be'oznei Adoni, v'ayichar abcha be'avdecha ki chamocha kefaro. He speaks to him, he comes close to him, and he says to him, please, my master, do not be impatient with me. Do not be angry with me, for you are like Pharaoh. You are as powerful as Pharaoh. Meaning, what? I know that this is very dangerous for me to. I have a lot of chutzpah.
Speaking with you.
Right? I'm about to speak in a way that's very chatzuf. And then what he does is, he does three things. First he tells them, first he decides to go back over the whole story. This is the longest monologue in Genesis. And for many commentators over the last 2,000 years, this becomes an example of great oratory skill and persuasive, like persuasion, the art of persuasion. He will tell the story again, but not exactly as it took place. He'll add various important elements to the story that were not actually told to us in the original telling of the story. Those really important selections and important additions and emendations will actually heighten what he's trying to, the story he's trying to tell, and they're used for great purpose and in great and importantly. And then in the second part of the story, he'll say what will happen if what will happen if things go as they're going, the consequences of the current events if they go unchanged. And then he makes a request and of the king of Joseph. So first, the retelling of the story. My master asked your servants, of course he's calling all of the brothers servants, which of course might also works on Joseph. Do you have a father or a brother? You guys tell me where he makes changes to the story, okay? And we told my master, we have an old father, and there he has a child of that he had in his old age, who was katan. He's not so katan, but anyway, he's little, and his brother died. That's okay. That's important because Joseph's listening. And then this phrase, "Vayivater hu levado." Where does that come from? Anybody know that phrase? "Vayivater hu levado," and he is left alone. Le'imo, to his mother. His mother, of course, is dead, but he means of his mother, and his father loves him. None of this is there in the first telling, right? In this particular valence. But what is that phrase? "Vayivater hu levado"? Anybody know where that appears? It's only twice in the Torah, and it's exactly the same phrase. Same three words.
With Jacob at the river crossing before the dark night soul and the wrestling with the Ish.
Exactly. Who was that? Who just said that?
Daniel over here.
Oh, Daniel Byrne. Okay. Nice. Why does the Torah use this? I wasn't going to plan to talk about this, but why does the Torah use this in this moment when Judah's talking about Benjamin being alone? We'll come back, maybe. And you said to your servants, bring him to me, and I will place my eye on him. In verse 22, and we said to our master, we can't bring the child, he can't leave his father. If he leaves his father, something will die. Who will die? We don't know. Likely his father. It's one of those moments where again, it's not clear, but in the context, it seems like his father will die. But none of this, by the way, is what it's like. Again, much of this is added by Judah. And then you told us, if you don't bring your brother down, your small brother, you will not continue to see my face, which means you will not have an audience with me, you won't have food. And it was when we went up to your servant, our father, we told him what you said, and our father said, go back and get a bit of food for us. They had run out of food, but no, Mayor, we can't go back. Says we can't go back only if Achino Katoni Tano Yarada. We can only go back if our small younger brother is with us. We will not be able to see the face of the man. And our younger brother is not with us. Now, of course, all of this is not said exactly in this way, but yet again, the Judah is now maybe unwittingly here, in certain cases consciously, but in other ways, only the reader knows how much this must be working on Joseph, because he keeps saying, if our younger brother is no longer with us, of course, that's Tarte Mashma. It's like both Benjamin and Joseph are being implicated in this language, and we know as the readers that this is working on Joseph. But of course, it's also working on him as the leader of, there are pieces of this that are very much implicating Joseph in his role as the viceroy, as an abusive, he's hearing the story as Judah is telling it to him, and Judah's making a very cogent case, even as the listeners know that there are two levels at which this is working, just internal to the narrative that Joseph is who he is, right? Judah is also working on him because he's telling him back what he did. And the way that he's telling it to him is implicating for him. Like he's essentially saying, we did everything you asked of us, right? And what's going on here? Now, of course, he's leaving out the parts where we stole the money, which are, he's not saying anything about the money, which is, of course, the biggest problem. How do you get out of that, right? Like, he's not addressing the thorn in the story, is that they are deeply guilty, according to the story. He's not explaining to them how the money got into his bags, right? Or how the goblet got into his bags, which, of course, if he could figure that out, then it would be obvious that Joseph is obviously playing a game on him and treating them very cruelly. But nonetheless, he's making a very strong case. Now, Vayetze, right? Vayomer Avdecha Avi Elenu Atem Yedatem. Now, this part is completely unspoken in the text earlier, and again, very powerful. He's trying to make a case that you're about to kill our father. Our father, your servant said to us, I had two children whom my wife, bore to me. Now this, if you're Joseph and you're listening, and you're a listener every year listening to this, you know that this is unbelievable, right? He's now telling Joseph a conversation that Joseph's father, whom he has not seen in 20 years, had internally to the family. And Joseph was thinking, why is he telling this to me? But he's telling it to him, and what he's telling should be extremely reminiscent of the way that life was back before he was thrown into a pit. Jacob is clearly stating preferential treatment for Joseph and Benjamin, saying it to the brothers, right? Before he would send Benjamin alone with the brothers, saying, I had two children that my wife had given, two children. You'll see, and one of them was taken from me, and I said out loud, he was eaten by wild animals, and I haven't seen him until now. And you'll take this one from me, and God forbid something will happen to him, and an accident will take place, and you will bring me to my grave. This is where all Jewish parents get that phrase from. You're going to bring me to my grave. And now, this is where he turns the key, right? First of all, just before we get to that, if you're of the opinion that this Judah narrative is also constructed on another level, where he says everything that Joseph needed to hear in order to now know that he could trust his brothers again, it's brilliant, right? Of course, I'm not going to assume that Judah knew this, but in saying what he said, that Dad told us that he loves your mom more than our mom, and loves you and Benjamin more than he loved us, And yet we still brought him down, and we didn't throw him into a pit, and we're not going to leave him here. Right? That's everything that Joseph needs to hear, right? That's like, in other words, everything is in, we did it again, here we are again, and wow, right? And now this makes the rhetorical value of what he's about to say that much more profound. Verses 30, 31, and 32. I'm sorry, 31, 32, 33 are, I would say 30 to the end of this piece, 34, are maybe some of the most brilliantly constructed verses in Western literature. The heightened tension, watch what happens. And now, if I come back to your servant, my father. He says the word avi here 14 times. Father, my father, 14 times. And the lad is not with us, of course, right? This is not just Benjamin, but who is called Na'ar in the book of, in the Joseph. Joseph, in the very beginning of the story, who Na'ar et b'nei Bilhah et b'nei Zilpah, verse, I think 2 or 3 in chapter 37. The Na'ar, the lad, who's the lad? Who's the Na'ar? It's Joseph, right? Now, if we come back to Dad and we don't have the Na'ar with us, and then he interrupts, and we don't say, right, we're waiting for him to say what will happen. If we come back, and right, we're all on the edge of our seat, and what will happen? If we come back, and he interrupts here, V'nafshok shura b'nafsho, and his soul is bound with his soul. Right, we delay the tension, right, is delayed, and it only heightens it. Right, what will happen? And then doesn't even say it, then he has to repeat it, and then he'll see that we don't have the Na'ar. Right, the Na'ar is not with us, Vamate. And he'll die. We will now be responsible for killing our father. And so will you. Right? In other words, you, Joseph, will be now responsible for killing Jacob. Maybe that was your fantasy. Maybe that's what you wanted. But he says, no, we won't let it happen. Ki avdecha arav etanar le'imavi. Now he tells him, I have collateralized myself, your servant, in place of this Na'ar, meaning you, Joseph, or you, Benjamin. And I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will have sinned all the days of my life. And then verse 33, and now he says, I will be a servant, in place of the Na'ar. The Na'ar here is repeated so many times. Again, like the construction here is remarkable. The word Na'ar, Avi, Avdecha, and of course Avdecha, Eved, what he's been calling himself and his father, Eved, servant, is of course what they did to Joseph, is they sold him into Avdut, into becoming an Eved. So he's using the very word in Hebrew, Eved, E-V-E-D, Eved, Avadim, Hayinu. He's using that now as a word in his persuasive argument to the rulers, saying, and also as the readers were saying, wow, this is karma, right? He's saying, I'm willing, we sold our brother into slavery, and now I will be sold into slavery. I will become an Eved, right? And he says, I want to be an Eved ladoni v'anar ya'al imechav, and let that Na'ar, that lad, go up with his brothers. And then this remarkable phrase, this remarkable sentence. Ki eich e'ele el avi, how will I ever be able to show myself in front of my father? V'hana'ar enenu iti, and the lad is not with me. Right? Right? Lest I see the evil that will befall my father, which of course we know he's also talking about what took place after Joseph was taken. He's not only talking about what will happen now if Benjamin isn't there, he's telling Joseph how everything Joseph needs to hear. My father, if you were wondering whether or not Dad mourned for you, he mourned for you. Right? He didn't do it on purpose. He didn't send you to the brothers on purpose in order to get rid of you. He was involved in the conspiracy. It killed him. And it killed me. and we won't do it again. And all of this is happening on the surface in this beautiful moment. Now, as I mentioned last night, that's only on the surface, but underneath the surface, the rabbis in the Midrash build a much different reality for us. In source number 2, if you look at source number 2, each moment of this monologue is actually reframed as a dialogue. Each moment of this monologue is reframed as a dialogue. You see it? I see a hand. Jay, go ahead. Is it on point?
It just the echoes. You built up beautifully the echoes with Joseph and Benjamin and the brothers, but and that's going on with Joseph and to some extent with the brothers. But I also felt another echo that the reader feels, and I felt it. And then of course it was nailed with the wonderful connection with Vayaterhu Levado, because the whole beginning of that passage with all that business, the ingratiating and the servitude and all that reminds me a lot of how Jacob approached Esau in terms of how, and so in a weird way, Joseph is now in a similar position to Esau, that he gets just revenge, and yet he shows great compassion. So that's another sort of echo for the reader, not so much for Joseph, obviously.
Yeah, if you want to go back to that, I think that I agree with you, Jay, that there's a lot of echo here with Jacob and Jacob's life, but the usage of the Torah, of the only other moment where that phrase, in its precision too, Vayivater Yaakov Levado, here it's Vayivater Hu Levado, and the Levad, Vayivater, it's just an amazing thing, and I think that it echoes the split, as we'll see in a moment, in like the Benjamin Joseph conversation and the brothers' conversation is a remnant of the unfinished business of Jacob and his brother Esau. And it will be finished, to the extent that it can be finished in a way, here in the final chapters of the book of Genesis. That wrestling match was not, never finished until Benjamin. Benjamin was the last residue of that wrestling match between Jacob and his brother, of that preferential moment. And when Jacob releases Benjamin, he recognizes that in some profound way that's been the problem all along, in a way. That this will have to come to it's only through the release of Benjamin that the brothers will have a chance right now of becoming the brothers again that they once were. And it was only in wrestling, right, that Jacob wrestled with Esau that he could become Israel. Right, and so, in a way, it's a powerful thread here, intertextually. Thanks for that. Let's look at this midrash and explore both the rabbis placing this conversation into the midrashic imagination and what it does for us as listeners and readers in terms of our understanding of what Jacob and Joseph were fighting about, the little dance that they're doing, the joust. So, can you guys with me? Midrash Tanchuma? Yeah? Don't you love learning Torah, guys? It's amazing.
Definitely.
Where could we be right now? Could be somewhere on, Peloton, I don't know. This is it, Parshaton. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have one question. If it's off point, then we can skip it. But we're coming towards the end of Bereshis. So this is probably when the brothers throwing Joseph into the pit is almost as bad as Cain killing his brother.
Yeah.
And I hear this, and it's a story, but these guys get off like scot-free here. This is like the worst thing you could do to your brother.
Right.
And these are the guys that form our whole tradition. These are and Esav is a horrible guy in Bereshis, but these guys are tzaddikim throughout history.
Well, they're reframed as tzaddikim for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
so let's come back to that. Can everybody? Let's hold Rob's important question until we get to the end of the story today. Okay, but let's 9:40 9:45, we're going to talk about that. Okay, let's look at this midrash. Yeah, Nikki.
Yeah, I have again a question that's maybe beside the point, but are they arguing for food for themselves only or for food for the people?
For their family, their tribe. They have a big
Just their-
tribe. They have a big tribe.
They have a big tribe. Okay.
They're not the leaders of the land of Canaan or whatever that is at that point. And each tribe had their own advocate, and their family is not just 12 of them. There are 70, and so 70. It's a small little clan, not a tribe, a clan, and they come to advocate for their family. אדוני שאל את עבדיו ואמר לו מתחילה בעלילה באת עלינו כי בכמה מדינות ירדו למצרים לשבור אוכל לא שאלת אחד מהן שמא ביתך באנו לכך אחותינו אתה סבור לישא אף על פי כן לא כיסינו ממך דבר. This is amazing. Whoever's writing this midrash is really unhappy with the ever fawning people, the fawners of Judah. Judah is a lion. Judah is, in later Jewish history, of course, Judah is the leader of the dynasty. The Davidic dynasty comes from Judah. Judah is not, this diplomatic wuss that comes and says to, Joseph, here I am, please, I beg you. But had a voice. Esau had a voice. And he comes, he says, from the beginning you practiced subterfuge, meaning that you framed us. You came at us with false accusations, with libels, with the elders of the protocols of elders of Zion. There are many who came from different lands to Egypt to get food. And the double standard, you applied a double standard to us. You didn't ask one of them why they were coming. Why did you come to us? Did we come to try to wed one of your children or offering some kind of marriage? We came to find food and we didn't withhold, we were completely honest with you. Amar la Joseph. Amar la Yosef, Yehuda, lama ta dabran mikol achecha? V'ani ro'eh b'gavi sheyesh b'achicha gedolim mimcha v'ata patit. Says, ad hominem, right? He doesn't respond. He says, oh, you Judah, why are you speaking on behalf of the brothers? I see that in my divination cup that you have older brothers, right? Who are his older brothers? Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. He's got 3 older brothers. And so you're some kind of garrulous creature. So Judah, now it starts, right? Let's the games begin. He says, Kol zot, he says, Amar lo, Judah says, Kol zot sheta ro'eh b'shvil ha'aravut she'arafti oto. All of this that I stand here in this way is because I have collateralized. I have mixed up myself with this young boy. Amar lo. And now it gets serious. He says, why didn't you collateralize yourself when you sold your brother? And he doesn't say OT, he says Oto. It doesn't say me, he says him. Right? When you sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and you made your father suffer, and you told him that he was torn apart. V'hu lo chatalach, he didn't sin against you. He says, but this one stole the goblet. So go tell him, your father, that the rope has followed the bucket. The bucket being Joseph, and this Benjamin is the rope. He threw the bucket in, and this is inevitable. It's like karmic. There's a cause and effect. You can't cut that rope. You threw Joseph in, and this is the consequence of it. Don't try to get out of it. In other words, all of this stuff where you're painting yourself as really innocent, please, really? And at that moment when he heard this, he screamed, right? Not in the way that the monologue in the Torah is presented, but he screams in a bitter voice, out loud, how can I go back to my father without the child? Amar la Yosef, so Joseph said, Bo v'nitvakech shnenu. You tell me your words, and you tell me your dinecha, like your case, and I'll fight with you. So then, this is this is the Midrash goes on to say, Judah says to Naphtali, go to all of the, go into all of the markets in Egypt, right? And all, this remarkable thing of giving them, go get, go gather people, we're going to fight. So no, it's not a fight. It's going to be a fight of, if you go to number 9 here at the bottom, Amar Yehuda. Look at this. Amar Yehuda. Judah railed at Joseph. Like he starts to tell him all the things you said to us. You've come, right? You've come to see the nakedness of the city, and finally you told us that we stole the cup. I swear by my life of my righteous father, and you may swear by the life of the wicked pair, that if I should draw my sword from its sheath, I will fill Egypt with corpses. Right? You start to get like it goes from like arguments about who's right and who's wrong to like Judah now displaying his strength. I will fill Egypt with corpses. Joseph says, draw your sword from its sheath. Joseph retorts, and I'll wrap it around your neck. Judah then says, if I but open up my mouth, I will consume you. And then Joseph says, if you open your mouth, I'll stuff it with a stone. And then Judah asked Joseph, what shall we tell our father? Tell your father. Joseph told him, right, the rope has followed the bucket. Judah said to him, you have judged us falsely. Joseph replies, right, he says to him, judge your brother falsely when you sold him. Did you judge your brother falsely? In other words, I judged you falsely, but who are you to point the finger? Judah says, the fire of Shechem burns in my heart, and Joseph says, I will extinguish the fire that burns within you for your daughter-in-law Tamar, because he said to burn her alive. You, Judah, talking about the fires of innocence and justice. You had your own fire with your daughter-in-law. In other words, look who's talking. They go on like this, right? Goes on and on and on. It's a long midrash. We're gonna cut to the chase at the bottom. Let's cut to the chase here. At the end of the midrash, let's go all the way to the end of the midrash. The end of the midrash will actually end on a redemptive note, but I don't want to go there yet. Let's just stop for a second and let's take in this midrash, which is so different in kind from the monologue as it's presented to us. In the monologue, Judah goes over what took place. Its echoes reverberate to Joseph. There is no anger, right? There's no sense of he comes completely without any recourse, without anything to say. And yet the rabbis construct an entirely different sub-narrative of this, which is one of jousting between Judah and Joseph, with claims being made back and forth. Now, like, two questions emerge. Like, what's the purpose of this midrashic expansion on what was a straightforward, beautiful soliloquy by Judah? Why make it into a dialogue? And number two, if the dialogue, as many say, is really a dialogue that takes place internally to Judah, what does it tell us as listeners is alive for the rabbis who then construct a world where there is more than just what the narrative is in the Torah, where there's prevarication, where there's doubt, where there's internal, like if this is the Fight Club and Judah is in a fight with himself and punching himself, why is Judah wrestling? Right? What are his wrestling match? So that's kind of a question to open up before we go to the next piece of Parshat Vayigash.
Just a quick question about the midrashic practice or intention. I understand the midrash to be a commentary. Why, as a commentary, do they presume to simply rewrite the primary text? Presumably, they're not questioning the veracity of the Torah. So why are they just rewriting it? It's astonishing, really.
It's an astonishing text, and it's one of the most remarkably audacious things that midrash is, and allows itself to do, is to embellish the text with things that are clearly not in the text, and often changing the text to meet their midrashic ends, and all of this not in any way, shape, or form smacking from heresy in their own minds, because the text is created by an omnivocal divine, and the assumption being that that infinity could not be captured in the black letters, and so the white space around them is equally infinite. And guess who fills in the white spaces? God fills in the black spaces, and then we humans come along and arrogate to ourselves no less important Sinai than the Sinai of the rabbis who said we can fill in, right? Which is why the New Testament is the argument over the New Testament is like, wait a second, we humans creating it? And it's like, yes. So you rabbis said that humans can create sacred text, which is what you did. And so the rabbi's motive here is the spacing. The rabbis here create, and what happens though is it turns what is ostensibly a straightforward appeasement / persuasion diplomacy to what's going on behind the scenes, backdoor, right? And in that, it deepens the character struggle of Judah, and it deepens. So now I'm saying what I think. What do you all think? Yeah, Andrea.
On a psychological level, I think you have to clear the air. Like, all that stuff is going unsaid, and there's so much baggage. And so this dialogue, in a way, allows all of that to get out of their system before they have the reconciliation.
So beautiful. I think Andrea is saying something so psychologically astute, which is that maybe for the rabbis at this point in time, at this point already when the rabbis are writing this, they can't imagine any kind of true reconciliation that doesn't stand on truth. And that there's a lot more to be said than what Judah is saying from Joseph's perspective, and a lot more for Judah to be saying. Judah is feeling, more than what he's saying here. He's kind of coming before power, and there's kind of like the stifling of his true voice because he's before a powerful figure. But if he's just talking to his brother, right, before they reconcile, they have to go through the schmutz. They have to go through original pain. Some people call it, like, they have to say to each other, like, here I am. I'm angry at you for putting us through this, and what you almost did to Dad. And we're enraged. And then Joseph says, "Yeah, wow, it's interesting that you found your voice 20 years later. Where were you when it was happening to me?" Right. So Andrea is saying that it's a psychologically honest and necessary stage in reconciliation that is being articulated by the rabbis.
Yes.
Tony. Brief.
It seems like the rabbis are proto-psychoanalytic mystics, like a Rumi type or a Jung type, and we here in Romemu and maybe other places like Lab Shul are post-psychoanalytic mystics, which is a beautiful combination. And not only psychologically, but part of what this whole deal is about, it seems to me, is that the whole world, whatever else it is a hall of mirrors. That the relationship between Judah and Joseph, in one sense, just mirrors his own deep internal conflict. And so what's one and what, the whole question throughout the various mystical traditions, among others, is what's one and what's two? What's one, what's two? And in this case, one yet two, me and you. Vis-a-vis.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So there's this post-psychoanalytic conversation between one and two. Between what's one, what's two. Beautiful. Okay. So I'm going to call on Paul, because Jay, you already spoke, so I just want to get people who haven't spoken yet. So sorry, I know it was on a different thing, but Paul, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom. It seems to me, it's always seemed to me that the rabbis understand deeply that we are in a land of story, but also in a land of metaphor. And there is a very profound struggle, another struggle, which is a political struggle to name the meaning of the metaphor, which ultimately has political implications. As this most latest piece, what is the meaning of Judah? Who is Judah? What is the story telling us about Judah? And the rabbis very much want Judah to be an aggressor. And so the story is reimagined with that political objective. I don't believe the rabbis are simple enough to feel that what they are saying is necessarily or categorically true. They want to make a strong enough argument to resonate through the ages, and that is what we are witnessing.
Right. So
Rabbi, with respect, I just want to say 10 seconds because that it totally connects to what I said earlier to what Paul just said, which is if in a weird way Yosef is reprising Esau, and if the rabbis associated Esau with Rome, what we've got here is Judah standing up to Rome's power with their own power.
Right. The problem, of course, with some of these, we have to be careful with these analogies because the rabbis are certainly not trying to say that Rome had an argument, right? It's very, like, in the end of this midrash, Joseph is actually vindicated more so than Judah. So in that analogy, the rabbis would now be saying that Rome also has good reasons to have been making the Jews suffer, which, again, we could go far afield conceptually as soon as we make these, but I hear both of your points, and I certainly think that midrash has there are many reasons for midrashic interpretations and what it serves, right? So it's serving an end, both, in the actual group that are receiving the midrash, for the canonized midrash and what it will do for all of us for the next 2,000 years who are reading it. There's certainly a reason for it. Certainly the Judah character in later parts of the Bible, Judah as a tribe of leaders and courage, and those who are courageous and warriors and kings would not want to be seen in a posture of supplication and appeasement to a greater authority. All of those reasons are strong for this midrash. But what happens in the midrash, remarkably, is it gives a voice to Joseph, right? Even though it changes the voice of Judah, Judah still has a voice in the soliloquy, where Joseph doesn't. Joseph is completely silent. And so what's remarkable in midrash is that Joseph, who looks like the powerful aggressor, becomes vindicated as the victim. Joseph's the psychology of Joseph's machinations, which on face value look like a cruel attempt at revenge, right? At face value become actually the deep structure of somebody who has every reason to express his anger, his rage, we read this story often and we think of Joseph as capricious, which is still remarkable to me. Right, I think Rob's point is well taken. These 10 brothers have gotten away scot-free with an atrocity.
Fratricide.
With an atrocity, a fratricide. And they've shown up, and we say, well, why should the rest of the family suffer because of, that's all true enough. And there are plenty of midrashim that are critical of Joseph for why didn't Joseph reach out to his father once he became the viceroy of Egypt? Why didn't he just say, all these things? But fundamentally, this midrash gives Joseph a voice and stands before Judah and his supplication and makes mincemeat of Judah. Judah here is given a voice of power instead of appeasement. That's all true. But Joseph doesn't shut him up. Joseph is not the first one to speak from a place of rage. Judah is. Judah says, I'm going to go down to the markets. And then Judah says, I'm going to take out my sword. And Joseph says, you take your sword? I'm not that little kid anymore. I'll take your sword and I'll wrap it around your neck. I'm not that kid that you threw into the pit. You can't just throw kids into pits anymore, right? So let me see where your courage is, because you didn't have it 20 years ago, and maybe others forgot what happened 20 years ago, but I didn't, and I want to see if you've really changed. Before we go forward in this narrative and you become the Judah that you're meant to be, let's see who you are. And I think the midrash here is profound, both in its giving Judah a different voice, and most importantly for me, in giving Joseph a real voice. Mm-hmm. Until this moment, he has not been direct about what motivates him and what hurt him, and his own rage and frustration and disappointment. And so I think that, to me, is part of the beauty of this match. But I wanted to go on a little bit more, if that's possible, because I know it's late. It's late in the game. It's 9:31. I want to go a little bit more. This last little piece, and I think that many of us will love this, or not, we'll see. But in the continuation of the story, source 3, and now Joseph could not control himself to all of those who were with him, and he cried out, please let everybody leave, so that no one was with Joseph when he confessed. The word here is used is bihitvada, which means to confess to his brothers. And the Midrash points out very beautifully here that this is a remarkable thing for Joseph to tell everybody so he could be alone with his brothers. The last time that he was alone with his brothers, right, it didn't go well. Mm-hmm. But he's alone, he has nobody there, no guards, nothing. He also, the Midrash points out, didn't want them to be embarrassed. It could be he didn't want anybody to know that he was Joseph that was there, but that's unlikely because they'll know in a moment. So the Torah tells us, V'lo amad ish ito. It's like an amazing remark. Why do we need to know that part of the story? He's the most powerful person in the world. If he becomes Joseph, nobody's going to say a word. But clearly, there's something here about being alone with his brothers again. And he begins to cry. And his crying becomes the crying that is heard throughout Egypt, and it was also heard in the house of Pharaoh. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us that. In the Midrashic amplification of this, his crying is so profound that it's heard everywhere. He's crying 20 years of anguish, 20 years of wondering if he would ever be reconciled with his brothers. Vayomer Yosef el Achav ani Yosef. He says to his brothers, the word Echav, his brothers, appears over and over again. I am Joseph. Like Jacob, right, who said, Ani, right, he said, who are you? He says, I'm Yaakov. And the first words out of his mouth, I am Joseph, Ha'od Avichai, which is where we get Od Avinu Chai from, right, that song, Od Avinu Chai, right? Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive, which of course makes no sense, because he knows his father's alive. He just was told over and over again that his father was alive. But he says, Od Avichai, it's the first thing he wants to know.
So why does he say it?
And his brothers couldn't answer him. It's a good question, Nikki. But I'm curious to hear what you think. But his brothers could not answer him because they were what? They nivalumi panav. They were totally terrified and shocked. Vayomer Yosef. V'lo yachlu.
לא יכלו לדברו.
L'shalom. V'lo yachlu. It's like there's a lot of inner intertextuality here. V'lo yachlu echav la'anot oto. They could not answer him. They were terrified of his face.
Rabbi, I think we just lost you.
I don't know why that happened, but okay. Maybe somebody's taken over. I don't know. Vayomer ve'ata, vayomer ani Yosef achichem. The first time he said, "I am your brother," I am Yosef. He said, "I'm Yosef." The second time he says it, he says, "I am Yosef, your brother." Asher mechartem oti mitzrayma, whom you sold into Egypt. Of course, how could anyone else know, right, that he was sold? So he says, "You sold me," and now he does this gift, this unbelievable moment. Because you sold me here. He turns the sale into from a mistake to a mission. The phrasing here from michira, which means sale, to shlichut, which means I was a messenger, I was on a mission, I was deployed. He changes that moment. He says, he first identifies himself as the one that was sold. And then he identifies them as the ones who sold. And then he says, no, do not be sad and do not be upset that you sold me, because you didn't send me. You didn't sell me. You didn't sell me. I was sent lemichya shlachani. God is the one who brought me here in order to lemichya, in order to help sustain you and everyone. Verse 6, there are 2 years, there's been a famine here, and there'll be 5 more years, there won't be any harvest. And verse 7, Vayishlacheni Elohim lifnechem, God has made me a shaliach, as an emissary, deployed. I'm on a mission. Lasum lachem sherit ba'aretz, to place for you, like something, not even sustain you, but that there should be lachyot lachem, to enliven you, lefleitag dolah, for a great deliverance. And then he says it more explicitly in verse 8, V'ata lo atem shlachtem oti hena, but just to be sure, it wasn't you who sent me here, but God. He says, go back, and then the rest of the rest of this, right? Go back and tell Dad, right? All of that. Now look at this. This is basically, right? If you look at these verses that I highlighted for you in the red and the green, like this is the fundamental shift that is the question of the aftermath of Joseph's story. after all the reconciliation and the rapprochement and the anger and the therapy and the weekends with the parents and the doing trips on it and dreaming on it and all of that, like fundamentally, maybe Alice Miller would not agree with this at all approach, but fundamentally the Bible says that on the front end of this, there was legitimate anger, legitimate need for rapprochement, legitimate justice work, and legitimate reconciliation work, and peace and reconciliation. All of that is in the present moment, looking backwards on one level. But then, once that work has been done, it is possible, and not saying it has to be done, the Torah invites the possibility, like I read last night from the most remarkable letter from Yotam Chaim's mother, Iris Chaim, whose son Yotam was killed accidentally by troops in last week. Knowing that those brothers in arms would live forever with that question mark, why do we, how could we? She wrote a letter releasing them. She wrote a letter saying to them, and she said, as sad as it is to say this, but my husband Raviv and my children, we release you. We don't know, right? And it's hard, but we want you to be able to be deployed. You're on a shlichut.
It really was Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace. It's unbelievable. It's like I can't like. By the way, by the way, not to say that that's the only way to respond, and that if you don't respond that way, then somehow you're morally deficient. God forbid. I'm not even saying that. I know, for example, that there were the relatives of another person shot told the head of Yoav Galant, the defense minister, who came to deliver the news, and screamed at him, "I will not rest until all of you who are responsible I'll hound you for the rest of your life." I mean, there's a howl here from Joseph that could be the howl of, right? And not everybody winds up in this, like, it's not always like, it's great to be able to use this as an example, but Joseph is clear in his mission here, and he's clearly on the other side of it. It's not like he's still in the pit. If he was still in the pit, he might not be able to find such high moral ground and say, "I release you, and God sent me, and it's all perfect." Right? Look, I'm a billionaire. It worked out okay, right?
Could only say that after time.
It took 20 years. It wasn't in the moment, right? And who knows if he was saying that also in the pit?
When he was in the pit.
Who knows? Who knows? Probably not.
Right.
And so there's obviously, there's in the moment and there's after the moment, and not even right. And there's danger in this approach. I just feel as though the Mor Nevuchim, the Rambam, which I wanted to bring here in source 5, essentially says, and I'll just give it to you outside, that he uses this moment as an example of something that he said, that the Torah often gives human beings and even God, right, human beings and other things, intermediate causes, but the intermediate causes are all, he says, related to the first cause, which is God, the will and the decree of God. So everything from rain to snow. So he says, like, it's true there are intermediate causes, but all of them can be traced back to the first cause. That's the Mor Nevuchim here. And he uses this story, right? If you look at the end of the source, which is on the next page, at the end of source 5, the Rambam says, right, that all of these things, right, are intermediate causes, but all of them can be traced back to the first cause. And the first cause is God, who sets things in motion. And this is exactly the way that Rashi understands the use of the word shlichut here. Where Joseph says, "I am a shaliach, I am a messenger," replacing sold into as opposed to sent towards. He's essentially going all the way back to verse 14 in chapter 37 in source 6, right? When Jacob sends Joseph down to Egypt, to see the brothers. Look at the verse here. Vayomer lo. Are you with me in source 6? In chapter 37, verse 14, source number 6. Yeah, you there? Right? Right? Are you there? Look at what Jacob said. He uses the word, I highlighted in green for you. I should have done it in the English. Jacob said to Joseph, Vayomer lo, lech nara et shlom achecha. Go see the peace of your brothers, which of course is more than ironic. It's the epitome of irony. The peace of the brothers, no peace of the brothers. Shlom atzon, and God bless you, and the peace of the sheep. Vashiveni davar, and bring me back a word. And then the Torah says, Vayishlacheu me'emek Chevron, and he sent him from the valley of Chevron, the word emek, which means valley, the deep place, and he came to Shechem. Rashi there, quoting Chazal, wrote it, quoting the rabbis, why do we have to know that he was sent from the valley of Chevron? And especially when Chevron is a mountain. Ela me'etza amuka shel oto hatzadik hakavur b'Chevron. The midrashic expansion of this word, the valley, which means deep, means that there's somebody who was lying in Chevron, who was buried in Chevron, who had an etzah, a deep piece of advice, and his name was Jacob. His name was Abraham, and Abraham was told in chapter 15, inevitably your children will be strangers in the land, right, of Egypt. And Jacob was acting unconsciously, unwittingly from the depths of the advice, meaning from the prophecy given to Abraham, meaning there was an ineluctable, absolutely karmic inevitability of Joseph's descent to Egypt. And that shlichut that he sent him, that Joseph was sent by Jacob all the way back in chapter 37, is now being realized when Joseph now uses the same term, I was sent on a mission. It goes back to that moment of mistake when we think it was a mistake. Joseph was like, why are you sending me to my brothers? What are you doing? And now Joseph himself, in realizing all of these things, putting them together in his mind, realizes, oh, wow, it started there. You sent me on a mission. You didn't know it then, but you sent me on a mission to come down here to save the family. Had you not sent me here, I would not be saving my family. Now, all of this, I just wanted to finish with this little teaching from the Sfas Emes, and then the Rebbe of Ger, the last source, which I did not translate, but I just wanted to read it because it's so beautiful, and it comes back, and I'll finish with you, Rob, because I promise I'll come back to you. The Rebbe of Ger writes here, if you're looking, I'll read it slowly in Hebrew here, but sorry if you don't know Hebrew letters, and just listen to his words, they're beautiful. And Judah approached Joseph. Judah's name means gratefulness. The Yehuda milashon hoda'ah. Judah is the embodiment of the principle of gratitude, which is in each Jewish person, and we might say every human. I heard from my illustrious grandfather that we are called Jews because we are ever thankful to God, the blessed God, for every small and large thing, because each of it comes from God itself, right? And because of that, we are able to come close. Through gratitude, we might find a way to approach. And this is good advice, he says. In every moment of stress and distress and the concealing of God's face that happens frequently, where we don't know where God is, the advice is, L'itbatel l'ritzon Hashem yitbarach. The advice given here in this moment of Judah's approach is to nullify our will before the divine awe through clarification that even within the concealment there is the divine aliveness that is God's own will. This is the meaning of Vayigash Elav, that Judah approached him. Him here means Joseph, but it's not clear. Him here means, and Judah approached God. And that too is called approach to Joseph. Why? Because Joseph is the archetype, the embodiment of the hidden spark or point in each thing in the world. Joseph is that which is hidden in the midst of the constriction of Egypt. In all of matter, in all things, there is a point called Joseph. Uve'emet haya az tsar me'od liYehuda. And let's be honest, at that moment, Judah was in a horribly narrow place. He was saying, how can I have no way out. But his advice was to get closer, to come closer, not further, to the inner point of life itself. He said he didn't add anything. If you look at the monologue, he didn't add anything new, which is not true. He added a lot. But anyway, he didn't add a whole lot of new things. He went over all the things in himself, so they were clear, in order to be able to receive God's will at that moment in joy. And through a clarification that everything was from God, that forced the revelation of that which was hidden on the inside. right? And in that moment, Lo Yachol Yosef, in that moment, the inner point known as Joseph could not restrain itself, as it were, which is the inner place, right? It had to become revealed. It had to come forth. וממילא הוציאו כל איש שההסתרות והחיצוניות שהם מסתרים הפנימיות נתבלו. And in that moment, of course, all of everyone, all of the Egyptians, meaning the constrictions that were in the room, had to leave the room. At that moment, when the inner point was revealed, all of the energies of negativity and difficulty and narrowness and pessimism were at that moment also released, and there was spaciousness in the room. So this is, the post-analytic mystic saying that this entire conversation is an inner dialogue between the point which is gratitude and that which is hidden, and gratitude knocking on the door every moment and saying, can you let me in? Can you let me in? And he goes on to say, I won't say it here, but I won't read it, but he goes on to say that when Judah said, Bi Adoni, when, please my master, which means literally in me is the master, he was acknowledging that in his own name, the name of Judah, which is gratitude, is God's own Yud He Vav He. The 4 letters of God's name are in the name Yehuda, right? And so the point he was trying to say is that this is all a conversation between the part of us that is hidden and wants to hold back and be angry, which sometimes needs to be angry, sometimes needs to be justified, and needs to recount the injustices, and the part that wants to be aligned with God and come out of that place into a place of openness and spaciousness. Now, just last thing before I'll open it up to some of the hands that are still up, and then I'm going to go up a little bit late. I just wanted to say to Rob about the brothers. I think that the rabbis are invested in both creating mythic figures, but also flawed heroes, right? I think the brothers are themselves the embodiment of the unresolved Cain trauma in chapter 4. I think there's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt that what the central question of the book of Genesis is, what do you do with Cain and his energies, with fratricide and familial discord? And the brothers express that in the most horrific way to Joseph. And the question of the end of Genesis is not whether or not they'll be punished, but will they be reformed? I think that the question of punishment is a valid question, but I think the Torah is more interested in the reformation of the brothers than in their being meted out their just deserts. I think that the Torah wants to say that the brothers, we don't know if the brothers were formed, by the way. They do say at one point, it must be because of our brother that we're being punished, right? So we don't really know the depth of but Judah we do know. Judah we know. And, and it could be that the brothers never actually learned a lesson, because Judah is the only one that really suffered enough to be able to empathize with Joseph, right? And that's enough. But I think that your point, by the way, is well taken. In the Midrash, the rabbis have a Midrash that says, people know about the Asara Harugei Malchut. There were 10 martyrs in Rome. We read the martyrology, which we don't at Romemu, but in many communities they read about the 10 great sages that were murdered by Rome, and it's read as part of the Yom Kippur experience in Orthodox and traditional circles. We don't have it. And one of the Midrashim claims that when the rabbis came to kill those 10, when the Romans came to kill those 10 rabbis, they came with a ruse, which was, you never paid for the 10 brothers never paid for what they did to Joseph, and we're now taking that. We're now coming to take that payment. And so, because there's a lot of Midrashim about when Joseph was released from prison and so on. So there was never any recompense. And so those 10 martyrs are karmic payback in the rabbis' minds. So they're clearly struggling with this too, that the Torah seems to let the 10 brothers to some degree off the hook, and Joseph takes the moral high ground, right, in a way that we love, and we're like, oh, that's great, but is it really just? I mean, what about these 10, 10 brothers? And then, of course, the rabbis make them all into great heroes. But it's not entirely true. That's what I'm trying to say, is that they struggled with your question. But my answer would be something like what I said, which is I think that the Torah is at this point interested in the reformation of the brothers. It's true. It's, by the way, towards the end of the story next week, we'll see that the brothers are themselves not convinced of Joseph's sincerity is holding, and they're worried, right, that when Jacob dies, Joseph will now punish them, wipe them out. So they're not altogether sure that and that hurts Joseph too. He cries, and we can decide whether or not that's sincere or crocodile tears. But your point is still well taken. I think that. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Okay, so I saw Beth's hand up for quite a while. So Beth, and then a couple people, and then we're going to go upstairs. Go ahead, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I've been stimulated by quite a few things that have been said. I was fascinated by Tomas's question. And I also really enjoyed what Tony had to say about the Hall of Mirrors, since in a way, sitting here in my office with all these rectangles in front of me, it's almost like I'm looking in a hall of mirrors, except I'm looking in everybody else's mirror because everyone's reflected. I'm currently reading Jung's last work, which mercifully was written in English, and he talks about the meaning of metaphors and symbols in dreams and how they are specific to each dreamer. And so if we're going to understand the metaphor in Torah, we have to have all of these different voices speaking to what each individual dreamer is seeing in it. And I think that's necessary so that we can start filling in all those white spaces.
Beautiful. Shamati. In the room, I think Tomas. Yeah.
Just a last minute question.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about Joseph as a avatar of agency and agility and ability and taking arms against a sea of troubles. And here, as you beautifully say it, he kind of gives this gift. And he said, no, it wasn't you selling me into slavery. It was actually God sending me ahead of time. And that is a beautiful spin. But I wonder how the sages, or this sage, or these sages, would also defend against the moral hazard of this, so everything happens for a reason, which I hate so much.
Like the Holocaust.
That kind of fatalism, or not, which blurs into nihilism.
Which gave birth to Israel.
Right, and that's sort of nice, but it's sort of terrible, because it says every Israel requires a Holocaust, which is ridiculous. So how do you defend against the moral hazard of that, well, it was for a reason, and therefore everything is for a reason, and therefore we should have no agency and no agility and no...
Well, I just want to say that I think that rabbis struggle with that immensely, and I think that if you look at literature, there are many different schools, and many who actually laud that kind of giving it over to God, and God is involved in everything, and don't withhold it in any way, and use Joseph, as you saw from the Rambam, as an example of somebody who is on a very on a kind of hierarchy of value. That's the greatest possible thing you could say. Hakol b'yedei Shamayim. There are those voices, right, within the tradition. Even Jacob,
like Joseph, is the least fatalistic character in the whole story.
In many ways, which is what makes him, in the rabbis' minds, all the more remarkable, because he both acts agentically in the world and holds the truth that no matter what he's doing, he's just an instrument of something that's some greater plan, and that doesn't inhibit his ability to actually act agentically. But when looking retrospectively, he acts prospectively as if he's the one in charge, and retrospectively as if everything was really happening anyway. And so there are many who hold that in that dual perspective, as if to act as if you are an agent, and then only afterwards give your agency over to God and say, God, right. Now, of course, we also know that that's deeply problematic, because you can't have that without also having to justify horrific things that happen in the world and give that over to God as well. And that makes it like you both solve one problem and then create a bigger one. And that's exactly what you're trying to say. How do you balance those two things? The perspective of human agency being limited without also, and maximizing God's agency without also maximizing God's blame and responsibility for those things agentically that God could have done differently but didn't, and that's the problem,
But that's
right?
true too, like the Odyssey.
It's the Odyssey, and so that's what you wind up having. So I think that our tradition is full of that problem. It doesn't go away, and it's I think the only thing I can say is that what's beautiful about the Joseph narrative is that he actually is not making a claim that everyone has to agree with. Like you won't find in the Torah this as a catechism. Like one must see the world the way that Joseph did. And it acts as a kind of possibility and not as a responsibility. Like, Joseph, came to a place where he said, I really feel like this was why I was put in the world. Now, you can try that one on for size and see if it works for you. You could actually see it that way and say, wow, I'm just like Joseph, I also see that. And you can also not see it that way. Be someone who says, I reject that entirely. That's not the way I want to live my life. Or I can't morally defend that position. And we don't actually have, for that very reason, like you must see things that way or else in our tradition, right? You're allowed a really wide expanse of philosophical perspectives. But I think that it's beautiful to have real life examples of a Joseph in this woman Iris Chaim and others. I mean, you see that. She said it, and it might, it might be true for someone, and it might actually. I also think there's a question of when you employ it. Like there are moments when that perspective, even if you believe it, would be horrifically cruel to say. Right? I would never walk into someone's home, right, in the first week of Shiva. He's just like, how could I, if they said it, I'd say, okay, wow, that's remarkable that that's your perspective. It does lead to kind of indefensible positions, and it's something that has to emerge from a person's own life experience for themselves. Joseph does not say it for the brothers. It's his own suffering that he frames that way. He never frames other people's suffering in that way, which is often the moment where it becomes immoral. It's one thing to say about yourself, right? I lost my legs, like my friend Alan Brown, who became a paraplegic at the age of 19, right? Who might say, I don't actually know if Alan says this, but I could never walk into Alan's room and say, you became crippled so that you could become the incredible advocate that you are, right? How would I, what? If Alan says it, I would just be in absolute radical, awe and witnessing of his journey. And I would also if he allowed me, I would ask questions as to how he came to that realization and how he reconciles it with his own belief in God's goodness. I would want to learn from him. And I think that those are people like who we stand before with great humility, and I think we should stand before people who are angry also with great humility. Like it takes great moral courage also to be angry. It's an expression of an intuitive sense of what is right and holding God to a certain standard, right? To hold God to a certain standard actually honors God, right? When Avram calls God a great judge and has the chutzpah to say, are you a great judge or not, is tremendously morally audacious and also complimentary. To say to somebody, like, in Yiddish we'd say it's pasnish to somebody, right? It's beneath you to do that. Wow. It can sound condescending, but usually it's not. It's elevating to say, I expected things from you. And that expectation actually is a sign of great respect for what you are capable of. And I think that you're capable of more is not always Jewish guilt or other cultural guilt. It's how I see you in your power, right? So I think that there's a lot to be said. Would that we could learn for 3 hours on Shabbat morning, but then we're not going to go upstairs. So we have to go upstairs. I'm sorry, Nehemiah. I'm already 15